she inherited an old barn with a hidden cabin. What she found changed everything. You don't belong here, Terri. And that rotting pile of wood certainly doesn't belong to you. Kristoffer Phillips sneered, his custom Lucchese boots kicking up Bitterroot Valley dust. He shoved the crumpled eviction notice against her chest. Take the $50,000. Leave Montana. Terri swatted his hand away, her knuckles white as she gripped the brass key her grandfather left her. Bernard Mocenigo built this place with his bare hands. Kristoffer, if you want this land, you'll have to bury me under it. The war for the hidden cabin had begun. A sharp, silent chill had descended from the Bitterroot Mountains, carrying the crisp scent of dry sage that cut right through Terri Campo's thin denim jacket. She stood at the edge of a rutted gravel driveway just off US Route 93, staring at the inheritance that had pulled her away from her quiet life in Seattle. It was a barn, a massive, weather-beaten structure of silvered timber that looked like it was losing a decades-long wrestling match with gravity. The roof sagged under the weight of accumulated Montana snows, and the massive sliding doors hung askew on rusted iron tracks. This was all her grandfather, Bernard Mocenigo, had left her. Terri rubbed her arms, her boots crunching on the dry earth. Bernard had been a solitary man, a ghost in her family's history, who sent only cryptic birthday cards postmarked from small mountain towns. Yet, when he died 2 weeks ago, his will had been aggressively specific. The barn and the 20 acres of timber behind it go to Terri. Let her find what I protected. The sound of a heavy diesel engine broke the mountain silence. A pristine, black, 2024 Lincoln Navigator crawled up the driveway, its chrome grille gleaming offensively against the rugged landscape. The driver's door opened, and Kristoffer Phillips stepped out. He was a man who wore his inherited wealth like a weapon-tailored pearl-snap shirts, silver belt buckle, and a tan Stetson that had never seen a day of actual labor. His family owned the adjacent Phillips Silver Mining Co., and half the county along with it. I see the prodigal granddaughter has arrived, Kristoffer said, his voice dripping with practiced condescension. He didn't look at her. His eyes were scanning the barn with ravenous intent. I thought you'd be smart enough to sign the papers in Seattle and save yourself the drive. I wanted to see what my grandfather thought was so important, Terri replied, holding her ground. Kristoffer chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Bernard was a crazy old coot who hoarded junk and stood in the way of progress. That barn is a hazard, Terri. The county is going to condemn it. I'm offering you a clean break. 50 grand. More than this dirt is worth. Before Terri could respond, a shadow detached itself from the side of the barn. The man who stepped into the fading afternoon light moved with the silent, deliberate grace of a predator. He wore a faded Carhartt jacket, worn leather gloves, and a dark gaze that instantly put Kristoffer on edge. This was Rhys Salvini, the caretaker Bernard had mentioned in his final letters. Mr. Phillips, Rhys said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the cold air. I believe the lady told you she wasn't selling. You're trespassing. Kristoffer's jaw tightened. He despised Rhys, a man who refused to be bought. This isn't over, Salvini. My lawyers will have this property tied up in probate hell so fast she won't be able to afford the property taxes. He turned to Terri, flashing a predatory smile. Enjoy the rats, Terri. I'll be back when you're desperate. As the navigator threw gravel down the driveway, Terri let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She turned to Rhys, who was watching the retreating dust cloud with narrowed eyes. He's been trying to buy this land for 10 years, Rhys muttered, walking toward the barn. Bernard wouldn't budge, said the land had a memory. Terri followed him into the gloom of the barn. The air inside was thick with the smell of old hay, motor oil, and ancient dry wood. Shafts of dying sunlight pierced through gaps in the siding, illuminating motes of dust that danced in the still air. Why does Kristoffer want it so badly? Terri asked, looking around at the rusted plows and stacks of rotting lumber. There's nothing here. Rhys stopped at the back wall of the barn, running a gloved hand over a massive, rough-hewn support beam. That's what your grandfather wanted everyone to think. Come here. He pressed his shoulder against what looked like a solid wall of stacked timber. With a heavy groan of wood on wood, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow passageway. Terri gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Bernard didn't just leave you a barn, Terri," Reese said, pulling a heavy brass flashlight from his coat. He clicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. "He left you what he was hiding behind it." Terri stepped through the false wall, the air instantly shifting from the dry dust of the barn to the sharp, damp scent of ancient pine and rich soil. The passageway led out of the back of the barn, opening into a dense, almost impenetrable thicket of towering Douglas firs. The trees grew so closely together that their interlocking branches formed a canopy, blocking out the sky and plunging the area into perpetual twilight. It was a secret pocket of the Montana wilderness, completely invisible from the road, the neighboring hills, or even the sky. A narrow, winding path, barely wider than a deer trail, led deeper into the timber. Reese walked ahead, his flashlight beam bouncing off the rough bark of the trees. "Watch your step," he cautioned over his shoulder. "Roots are thick here." After a 5-minute hike that felt like a descent into another century, the trees suddenly parted. Terri stopped dead in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. Nestled in a small, perfectly concealed clearing was a cabin. It wasn't a modern log home, but a true pioneer structure, built from massive, hand-hewn logs, chinked with clay and horsehair. The roof was made of thick cedar shakes, mossy and green with age. A stone chimney ran up the side, and a small porch spanned the front. It looked as though it had been grown from the earth itself, rather than built upon it. "My God," Terri whispered, stepping forward reverently. "I had no idea." "Nobody did," Reese said, stepping onto the porch and pushing open the heavy oak door. "Except Bernard, and me. He made me swear not to tell a soul until you arrived." Inside, the cabin was a masterclass in survival and preservation. It was impeccably clean, free of the dust that choked the barn. An old cast-iron wood stove sat in the center of the room. Against the far wall was a heavy oak desk, covered in stacks of yellowed paper, leather-bound ledgers, and a vintage brass Coleman lantern. In the corner, resting securely on a gun rack, was a pristine Winchester Model 1894 lever-action rifle. "What is this place?" Terri asked, running her hand over the smooth wood of the desk. "It's the original Mochenigo homestead," a new voice called out. Terri spun around to see her best friend, Jenna Hills, standing in the doorway, panting slightly from the hike. Jenna had driven her Subaru Outback straight through from Seattle to help Terri sort through the estate. Pushing her wire-rimmed glasses up her nose, Jenna looked around the cabin with the awe of an archivist discovering a lost library. "Jenna, how did you get past the barn?" Terri asked, rushing over to hug her. Reese left a trail of breadcrumbs. Jenna smiled, nodding at the quiet ranch hand. "Or rather, he texted me the exact coordinates and told me how to find the hidden door." "Terri, do you know what this is?" She gestured to the room. "This isn't just an old cabin. This is history." For the next several hours, the three of them began carefully going through the contents of the cabin. The walls were lined with wooden shelves holding mason jars filled with preserved seeds, old tools, and rolled-up topographical maps of the Bitterroot Valley. But it was the desk that held the real treasure. Jenna, wearing cotton archival gloves she'd brought from the city library where she worked, carefully opened one of the heavy leather-bound ledgers. "These are Bernard's journals, and not just his. These go back to his father and his grandfather." Terri pulled up a wooden chair, leaning over Jenna's shoulder. The handwriting was faded but elegant, detailing crop yields, harsh winters, and dealings with the local townspeople. But as they flipped toward the back of the oldest ledger, the entries grew darker, more frantic. "Look at this," Jenna whispered, pointing to an entry dated the 14th of October 1922. Terri read the cursive script aloud. "Silas Phillips came again today. He knows about the vein beneath the East Ridge. Offered me pennies on the dollar. When I refused, he threatened to divert the creek and starve my cattle. I have hidden the true survey map and the president's patent where his greedy eyes will never find it. If they want the silver, they will have to kill me for it." Terri sat back, the blood draining from her face. Silas Phillips was Kristoffer's great-grandfather. The Phillips silver mine, the source of Kristoffer's immense wealth and arrogant power, was located entirely on the East Ridge, bordering Terri's land. "He didn't just want the barn," Terri said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and realization. "He wants to make sure whatever proof my grandfather had stays buried forever." Reese stepped forward, his jaw set. "If Kristoffer knows this cabin exists, he'll burn it to the ground with us in it to get those papers." The next morning, the reality of the threat arrived in a cloud of dust and the sharp click of designer heels. Terri and Jenna were in the main barn, trying to catalog the junk to make the property look occupied, when a sleek silver Mercedes sedan pulled up alongside Terri's rusted rental car. Out stepped Draga Ulrich. She was Kristoffer Phillips's lead attorney, a woman who looked entirely out of place in the rugged Montana landscape. She wore a tailored John knit suit in charcoal gray, her platinum blonde hair pulled into a severe bun. Her eyes were as cold and unforgiving as the winter ice on the Bitterroot River. "Miss Campo," Draga said, her voice perfectly modulated, betraying no emotion. She carried a thick leather briefcase. "I was hoping to find you before you made any permanent mistakes." "Like staying?" Terri asked, crossing her arms. "Exactly." Draga didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped into the barn, her nose wrinkling slightly at the smell. She popped open the clasps of her briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. "Your grandfather, Bernard, was a stubborn man. He was also deeply in debt. According to our records, he took out several substantial off-the-books loans from the Phillips Corporation over the last 2 decades. Loans he never repaid." Terri stared at the papers. "That's a lie. Bernard hated the Phillips family. He would never borrow a dime from them." "The signatures say otherwise," Draga replied smoothly, holding out a document with a scrawled signature that looked vaguely like Bernard's. "With interest, the estate owes my client just over $600,000. Since the estate is insolvent, we are placing a lien on this property. You have 48 hours to vacate before the county sheriff arrives to forcibly remove you and auction the land to satisfy the debt." Jenna stepped forward, adjusting her glasses. "You can't do that. A lien requires a court order and a signature verification. You're trying to bypass probate." Draga's cold eyes snapped to Jenna. "I don't know who you are, little girl, but in this county, the Phillips family name is the court order. Be off this land by Friday, Miss Campo, or you'll leave in handcuffs." She turned on her heel and marched back to her Mercedes. Terri felt a wave of nausea. They were trapped. She didn't have the money to fight a drawn-out legal battle against a billionaire. "We need help," Reese said from the shadows of the hayloft, having listened to the entire exchange. "We need Ron Sage." An hour later, Terri and Reese were sitting in the dusty, cramped back office of the Bitterroot Heritage Museum in town. Ron Sage, an 80-year-old historian with a raspy voice and skin like tanned leather, sat across from them, drinking black coffee from a chipped mug. The room smelled of peppermint and decaying paper. Ron adjusted his thick spectacles as he looked at the photograph Jenna had taken of the forged loan document. He let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Draga Ulrich is a viper, but she's getting sloppy," Ron croaked. "Look here at the date, 2015. And look at the ink pattern. Bernard broke his right hand in a logging accident in 2014. It healed bad. Every signature of his after that year leans heavily to the left. This forgery is a perfect imitation of his signature from the 1990s. Terri leaned forward. "So we can prove it's a fake?" "Proving it in a courtroom owned by Kristoffer's golfing buddies is another matter," Ron warned, taking a sip of his coffee. "Kristoffer is desperate. The veins in the main Phillips mine are drying up, but the geological reports, the real ones that Kristoffer's father tried to suppress, show that the mother lode, the richest vein of silver in the valley, runs right under your barn and that hidden timber. If he doesn't get your land, his empire goes bankrupt." Ron leaned over the desk, his ancient eyes locking onto Terri's. Bernard spent his whole life looking for the original 1,890 land patent signed by Grover Cleveland and the original geological survey. If you find those, they supersede any deed or lien Kristoffer can manufacture. They prove the silver belongs to the Mocenigo bloodline. Terri thought of the massive oak desk in the hidden cabin. "We haven't found a map or a patent yet, just the journal." "Then you better look harder, Terri," Ron said grimly, "because Kristoffer won't wait for the law. When cornered, a Phillips will always resort to fire." The night sky over the Bitterroot Valley was a canvas of absolute, suffocating darkness, heavy with the threat of an unseasonable storm. Terri was back in the hidden cabin, wrapped in a faded Pendleton blanket, holding the brass Coleman lantern over the old oak desk. Jenna was asleep on a small cot in the corner, exhausted from hours of reading through old ledgers. Terri rubbed her burning eyes. They had searched every drawer, every shelf, every floorboard of the cabin, but the Grover Cleveland land patent and the original survey map were nowhere to be found. Had Bernard lost them? Had they ever existed? Outside, the wind began to howl, violently thrashing the branches of the Douglas firs. But beneath the sound of the wind, Terri heard something else. A sharp, rhythmic, cracking sound, like dry twigs snapping. Then, she smelled it. The acrid, unmistakable stench of wood smoke. Terri dropped the ledger and sprinted for the cabin door, throwing it open. Through the dense trees, she could see a horrifying orange glow illuminating the false wall that led back to the barn. "Jenna, get up," Terri screamed, grabbing the Winchester rifle from the rack out of pure instinct. She ran through the narrow timber path, the heat growing more intense with every step. When she pushed through the hidden door into the main barn, she was met with a wall of blistering heat and choking black smoke. The front of the barn was entirely engulfed in flames. The ancient, dry wood was catching like tinder, the fire roaring as it climbed the support beams toward the hayloft. Silhouetted against the inferno was the figure of a man holding a red gas can. "Hey!" Terri yelled, racking the lever of the Winchester. The metallic clack-clack echoed over the roar of the fire. The figure spun around. It wasn't Kristoffer, but one of his hired thugs from the mine. Seeing the rifle, the man dropped the gas can and bolted out the side door into the night. Terri coughed violently, her eyes streaming as she fell to her knees. The smoke was toxic, blinding her. Suddenly, strong hands grabbed her under the arms, hauling her backward. "Move!" Reese yelled, half carrying her out the back of the barn and into the cool air of the timber. He was soot-stained and breathing hard. "The barn!" Terri cried, struggling against his grip. "We have to put it out. We can't save the front, but we can stop it from reaching the timber and the cabin," Reese commanded. He dragged a heavy, canvas hose from an old hand pump well near the tree line. "Pump, Terri. Pump like your life depends on it." For the next hour, it was a desperate, agonizing battle of water and earth against fire. Terri pumped the heavy iron handle until her shoulders screamed in agony, her hands blistering, while Reese directed the meager stream of water onto the dry grass in the back wall of the barn, creating a fire break. As dawn broke, painting the smoke-filled sky in bruised shades of purple and gray, the fire finally died out. The front half of the grand old barn was nothing but a smoldering, charred skeleton, but the back wall and the hidden entrance to the cabin miraculously remained intact. Terri collapsed onto the wet ground, trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. Reese sat beside her, wiping soot from his face with a blackened rag. Just then, a rusted 1,998 Ford F-150 rattled up the driveway, carefully avoiding the smoking debris. Sarah Boussain, the sharp-eyed woman who ran the local diner in town, stepped out. She was wearing her pink waitressing uniform under a heavy coat. She marched over to Terri and Reese, looking at the destruction with a grimace. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a heavy, custom-engraved silver Zippo lighter. "Found this by the main road," Right where a black Lincoln Navigator was parked with its lights off at 3 in the morning, Sarah said, handing the lighter to Terri. Terri turned the heavy silver object over in her soot-stained hands. Deeply engraved into the metal were the initials, KP. Sarah crossed her arms. I already called the sheriff. Kristoffer Phillips has owned this town for too long. People are tired of the bullying. I saw his truck, Terri. I'll testify to it. Terri gripped the lighter. The fear that had been paralyzing her burned away, replaced by a cold, hard fury. Kristoffer had tried to kill her. He had tried to burn her grandfather's legacy to ash. We need to find that map, Terri said, her voice turning to steel. She looked at Reese. Right now, the smell of smoke clung to Terri's clothes as she tore through the hidden cabin, a woman possessed. The adrenaline of the fire and the hard evidence of the silver lighter had shattered any remaining hesitation. Jenna and Reese stood by, watching her dismantle the cabin with systematic intensity. Terri, we've looked everywhere, Jenna said gently, her hands black with soot from helping sift through the barn debris earlier. We've checked the walls, the ceiling, under the mattress. If the patent was here, we would have found it. Terri stood in the center of the room, her chest heaving. Bernard said he hid it where greedy eyes would never find it. He wouldn't just put it in a drawer. He built this place to protect it. She slowly turned, her eyes scanning the room. The shelves, the desk, the wood stove. Her gaze locked onto the massive, cast-iron wood stove. It sat on a raised hearth made of heavy, irregularly shaped river stones. Reese, Terri said, her voice dropping to a whisper. When Bernard was here, did he ever use that stove? Reese frowned, stepping closer. No. Now that I think about it, he always used the small kerosene heater in the corner. Said the chimney draft was broken. Terri fell to her knees in front of the hearth. She grabbed a heavy iron poker from the stand and began scraping at the hardened clay mortar between the river stones directly beneath the stove. Help me, she ordered. Reese grabbed a crowbar from the tool shelf, and together they began to pry at the stones. The mortar, though old, was incredibly tough. After 10 minutes of grueling labor, a large, flat stone shifted with a harsh grinding noise. Reese jammed the crowbar underneath it and heaved. The stone flipped over, revealing a dark, square cavity lined with lead. Terri's breath caught. Reaching into the cavity, her fingers brushed against something wrapped in heavy, waterproof oilcloth. She pulled it out. It was a package, bound tight with leather straps. She carried it to the oak desk, her hands shaking so badly she could barely undo the buckles. Jenna and Reese crowded around her. As the oilcloth fell away, the smell of ancient parchment filled the air. Inside lay a stack of documents, perfectly preserved. On top was a thick piece of parchment bearing the embossed seal of the United States government. Terri carefully unfolded it. It was the original land patent, dated 1890, granting the specific coordinates of the Bitterroot parcel to Silas Mocenigo. And at the bottom, bold and undeniable, was the signature of President Grover Cleveland. Beneath the patent lay a large, folded geological survey map drawn on heavy vellum, dated 1922. Jenna carefully unrolled it, weighing down the corners with mason jars. The map showed a cross-section of the mountainside. Oh my God, Jenna breathed, tracing a thick red line drawn deep beneath the surface. The red line marked the main vein of silver. According to the original survey coordinates, the vein didn't begin on the Phillips side of the ridge. The entrance to their modern mine was on their land, but the tunnels angled sharply underground, crossing the property line. The entire active Phillips silver mine, Reese murmured, staring at the map, is under our feet, Terri finished, a fierce smile spreading across her face. Kristoffer's family didn't just steal the land. They've been illegally mining Bernard silver for 80 years. Kristoffer doesn't own a billion-dollar empire. He owes my family $1 billion in stolen minerals. At the bottom of the package was a single handwritten letter. Terri recognized Bernard's shaky left-handed scrawl. To my Terri, if you are reading this, the fire has passed and you have held your ground. The Phillips men are cowards who use money to hide their sins. I spent my life guarding this secret, so they could never legitimize their theft. Now, the land is yours. Make them pay for what they took. Make them remember the name Mochenigo. Love, Grandpa. Terri folded the letter, slipping it into her jacket pocket. She looked at Reese, her eyes burning with a newly forged fire. Get the truck, Reese, Terri commanded. We're going to town. The Bitterroot County Town Hall was a bustling hub of local government, normally sleepy on a Tuesday morning. But today, the main chambers were packed. Kristoffer Phillips stood at the front podium, looking impeccable in a tailored suit, projecting the image of a concerned community leader. Beside him stood Draga Ulrich, her face an unreadable mask of legal superiority. They were petitioning the county commissioners for an emergency seizure of the Mochenigo property, citing environmental hazards due to the barn fire. Commissioners, Kristoffer said smoothly, leaning into the microphone. The fire at the Mochenigo property last night proves that the current owner is negligent and a danger to the valley. The county must step in, seize the land, and allow my company to safely clear the hazard. I think you've caused enough hazards for one lifetime, Kristoffer. The heavy oak doors of the chamber swung open. Terri Campo walked down the center aisle, her boots clicking loudly against the hardwood floor. She hadn't changed clothes. She still wore her soot-stained denim jacket, a visual testament to the night's violence. Flanking her were Reese Salvini, looking menacing in his battered Stetson, Jenna Hills holding a thick leather portfolio, and Ron Saj leaning heavily on a cane. Trailing behind them was Sheriff Miller, a stern-faced lawman who had served the valley for 30 years. Kristoffer's confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning. Miss Campo, how nice of you to join us. I'm sorry about your barn, but as you can see, the county isn't giving you my land, Terri interrupted, stopping in front of the podium. She slammed the heavy Zippo lighter onto the wood. It echoed through the silent room. You dropped this when you tried to burn me alive last night, Kristoffer scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. A ridiculous accusation. I was at home all night. Sarah Bussain saw your truck fleeing the scene, Mr. Phillips, Sheriff Miller stated, stepping forward. We have her sworn statement, and we have tire tracks matching your navigator. Kristoffer's face flushed red, but Draga Ulrich smoothly stepped in. Sheriff, this is circumstantial at best. You have no motive. I have the motive right here, Terri said. She signaled Jenna, who opened the portfolio and handed a stack of high-resolution color copies to the commissioners, the sheriff, and finally slapped a set down in front of Draga. That, Terri announced, her voice ringing clear and authoritative, is the original 1,890 land patent signed by Grover Cleveland and the 1,922 geological survey. It proves conclusively that the primary silver vein sustaining the Phillips mining operation is located entirely on my property. The room erupted into gasps and furious whispering. The commissioners stared at the documents in shock. Kristoffer snatched the papers from the podium, his eyes darting frantically over the lines and coordinates. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. These are forgeries. That old man faked them. Ron Saj at the Heritage Museum has authenticated the paper, the ink, and the presidential seal, Terri shot back. Furthermore, the State Geological Board in Helena received a digital copy of these documents an hour ago. They are sending surveyors tomorrow. Terri leaned in, lowering her voice so only Kristoffer and Draga could hear. You've been trespassing, stealing, and mining on my land. The back taxes, the royalties, and the fines alone will bankrupt your family. You are finished, Kristoffer. Kristoffer turned wildly to his lawyer. Draga, do something. Fix this. Draga Ulrich looked down at the indisputable proof of generational fraud. She looked at the sheriff, who was holding handcuffs, and then back to the sweating, panicking billionaire. Drago was ruthless, but she wasn't suicidal. She calmly closed her briefcase. "Mr. Phillips," Draga said icily, stepping away from him. "As of this moment, I am withdrawing as your legal counsel. I advise you to remain silent." "You bitch!" Kristoffer screamed, his carefully cultivated arrogance shattering into pathetic desperation. He lunged toward the documents, but Reese was there in a flash, his heavy hand clamping down on Kristoffer's shoulder, driving him to his knees with effortless strength. "Let the sheriff do his job, Mr. Phillips," Reese growled. Sheriff Miller stepped forward, pulling the cuffs from his belt. "Kristoffer Phillips, you are under arrest for arson, attempted murder, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent." As the cuffs clicked shut around Kristoffer's wrists, the entire chamber watched in stunned silence as the untouchable king of the Bitterroot Valley was led away, his empire crumbling to dust beneath his custom Lucchese boots. Hard karma had finally come to collect. Terri walked out of the town hall into the bright, crisp Montana sunlight. She looked up at the jagged peaks of the mountains, taking a deep breath of the pine-scented air. She had saved the land, honored her grandfather, and discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. The barn was gone, but the hidden cabin and the legacy it protected was finally free. The story of Bernard Mocenigo's hidden cabin is a powerful reminder that truth, no matter how deeply buried beneath the shadows of greed, always finds the light. Terri Campo didn't just inherit timber and stone, she inherited the unyielding resilience of her bloodline. In our own lives, we often face overwhelming opposition from those who believe power dictates right. Yet, just like Terri, standing firm on the foundation of honesty and honoring our roots can weather any storm. Karma has a beautiful, unrelenting way of balancing the scales, turning the arrogance of the wicked into the very instrument of their downfall. If you found yourself captivated by Terri's journey of justice and discovery in the rugged Montana mountains, please like this video, share it with your friends who love a great Western redemption story, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, dramatic tales.